We're going to have a good program for you today. There's a couple of different things that we want to do. First of all, what we want to do is we will have a Q&A. That is after the speakers are all done. We'll have a Q&A. That'll be after everybody's done speaking. When we do the Q&A, we will have microphones on each side of the room. Chris, you want to stand up? Chris will be on this side of the room with his microphone. And I'll be on that side of the room. You'll be able to see Chris, but if somebody's standing, you won't be able to see me. So what we're going to do with that is we want to make sure that we're asking the Q&A, and also this is about question and answer, and this is about America. This is about our rights, and this is about us all wanting to do something and be together on this. Yeah? Yeah. All right. So what we want to do when we do Q&A, because we have a limited amount of time, once these gentlemen are done speaking, and believe me, if you have a notepad, you're going to want to use it. If you've got a pen, take those notes, listen to it. If you want to stream this on your phone or do whatever you want, whatever you guys want to do it. But the one thing we want to do is, I think it's fair that if you have a question, you ask your question and you get your answer, and then you let the next person ask a question. Does everybody want to do that? Let's see a show of hands. How many people want to do that? So what I'm saying is if there's somebody here who wants to stand up and make a statement, that ain't going to happen. How many people agree with that? This isn't about anybody's particular platform. It's informational, ain't it? And it's all something we're going to do because we all understand that this state, you ain't seen nothing yet. With Gavin Newsom, we're going to be wishing we had Governor Brown back. He's going to look like the father of conservatism compared to Newsom. Now, I'd also like to know, are there any elected officials in here or people who have run for office? Please stand. Very good. Now, we did have the congressman here. Is he in the bathroom? Oh, he went up to his car? So when he comes back in, we should all tell him your lights were on. They're laughing because theirs are. Okay. So anyway, what I'd like to do first is I'd like to introduce our first two speakers, and that would be Bernie and Woody.
Well, when we were talking about having a Second Amendment meeting, a lot of folks right off think about their gun rights, and all that's important and true. But the first line of the Second Amendment says, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state." And the media has done a really good job, and so has the government, of suppressing the militia and making it into a bad thing. I wanted to say too, it's good. We got guys from the Delta Company all the way up from the Bay Area. Guys from Alturas are here, and a lot of guys have traveled a long ways to come here to this. And when we first started doing our thing about 8 years ago, it was a lot of folks, man, almost thought of militia like they do the Ku Klux Klan or something. You know, it was like a word that you almost didn't use. And so we worked really hard to change that. We're active in our community, and we started community watch programs. We've set up evac centers for refugees on the fires, and donation centers, and we do a lot of different things like that to get people. We've had, just in Cottonwood, we've had over 500 people come to trainings of one kind or another, learn about using, radios, learn some medical and different things like that. But in the end, for me, what was really important about that line in the Second Amendment where it says a well-regulated militia, a lot of times you'll hear people say, liberals especially, will say, well, they were talking about the Army, or they were talking about National Guard. And, our founding fathers were I believe they were geniuses. I mean, when they used the word militia, they did it on purpose. They meant an armed citizenry, because the thing they feared most in this whole experiment was tyranny and government. And a lot of times we talk about community service and all the different things we do in our different communities, but really the number one thing was they wanted the people to be able to, in case the government was ever oppressing them or tyranny was crushing them, to have the ability to stand up for themselves. It was a real important thing. So it's been real fun getting things back up and running. A lot of these, we got companies all over the state now, and people are really getting used to the idea. Again, we have meetings with our sheriffs, and nobody really thinks of us as Klansmen or anything else like that now. So that's been good. I'm gonna let Bernie talk for a minute, and he's way smarter than me, so he's better at this.
So my name is Bernie Kelly. I'm a public school teacher and a militia member. I just want to get that out there, because when I first joined the militia in 2010, that is not something that I would have said. I would have come out and said, hey, I'm Bernie Kelly, I'm a karate instructor, I'm a teacher, I'm a militia member. So militia, Woody asked me to give a brief history. What is the meaning of militia? What does militia mean? Militia is a soldier, is a fighter. They're not a soldier. Soldiers are paid people. Militia people are fighters. So somebody comes into your house in the middle of the night. It's up to you to restore domestic tranquility. It's up to you to provide for defense in your home. Nobody's coming to do that for you when they're in your home. At an individual level, families will send those people who are capable of fighting to fight for them. And then families get together, we call those clans. And then the clans get together, we get enough clans, you get 1,000 people, a few thousand people, you get what's called a tribe. And when they get to be about 10,000 people in the tribe, or groups of tribes working together, we get what's called a city or a state. So a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. A state's roughly somewhere between 10,000, tens of thousands, and 1 million people. That's kind of the definition. And they're trying to restore domestic tranquility. They're trying to provide for the common defense. Most importantly, what most people are concerned about is food, shelter, clothing. Respect, that's what it's about. And at that moment, when you crawl out of your bed first thing in the morning and somebody's in your house, you're not thinking about how you're going to do this. It's the moment when the lion has the antelope. It's that moment when the hawk has the rabbit. That's what a fight is. You can't go anywhere to learn other than just somewhere deep in your guts. You're going to do something, anything to survive this moment. That is what a fighter is. Militia people are fighters, and they're fighting for a way of life. They're fighting for their rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That's what they're doing. Soldiers get paid to do that. In the old days, those people that went for their clans and their tribes, they went back to their homes. They went back to being craftsmen and tradesmen and homemakers and husbands and wives and somebody's son and somebody's daughter. They didn't stay where they were as a paid soldier. The state of California says that if you're between the ages of 17 and 45, you're a militia member. Afterwards, you have the privilege to continue your service if you wish to do so. That law is in almost every state. There's a few states that didn't include it in their constitution. It's still on the books. It was in California in 1789. The states at one point were so afraid of tyranny that they didn't even want a standing army. From the time the Declaration of Independence was enacted and voted upon and agreed upon, all the way until the Constitution was ratified, it was a confederacy of states, and they were providing militiamen to fight. And there were problems with that because, again, these people are volunteers. They're fighting for their home. They're not fighting for Florida. Nobody wants to leave New York and go to fight for Florida. Nobody wants to go to New York and fight for New York. Texas had friends. People were willing there to go and fight, right? But militia are a local thing. It's not a standing army. It's about friends and family. It's citizens helping citizens, neighbors helping neighbors. It's insurance is what it is. So here we are, the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia. That means we're training, we're learning how to do things, and it's about car accidents. It's about you having the power and authority to secure your own freedoms, to make sure that other people are still alive. You get out of a car accident, you secure the location. You don't run out on the road and get hit trying to save somebody. You call somebody, say, hey, get here, somebody's hurt. Then you go do whatever you need to do to secure that location, make sure that those folks are alive and breathing, CPR, whatever. You get all the people around you. That's the same thing that happened in these fires. It's the same thing that's happened in all the tornadoes and the floods. That's what's going to happen. Militia is what happens when the government can't make it. That's a big deal. And then to secure the blessings of liberty, right, and to secure a free state, we're going to make sure that each and every one of us is being respected, respectable, and we're going to make sure that the government's going to do that. The government doesn't have police officers for the government. We the people are supposed to hold them in check. The militia, just because we exist, the militia is showing the government that we're not going to tolerate you treating us improperly, taking and stomping on our freedoms. Don't tread on me. Don't tread on me. The very existence of the militia. So I'm encouraging each and every one of you to get out there, find your local group, figure out what you can do to be prepared to do food, shelter, clothing. We got to think of the fires. We got to set up some place for people to sleep. We need people to set up places for people to wash. We need people to make food. We need people to provide medical. We need people to provide a lot of communications. And we need people to make sure that people aren't stealing other people's stuff during that time. And that's more or less the history of the militia. It's never changed. Everybody can trace back to tribes in Europe and Asia and all over. It's never changed in this country, and it doesn't change because when a disaster happened, that's what happened. Gets right back to that level. Families, communities coming together, right? And you have the right to bear arms because each and every one of you, at that moment when you show up, you're the person in charge. The number one product of the militia is leadership. You're the leader of the moment. You have a clear head, and you're telling people, call the police and get the sheriff and the ambulance here. You go down there and stop those cars from coming. You're the person who's going to say, hey, I need 7 men to help start clearing debris here. I need you folks to get water on this fire until the fire team shows up, until the fire department shows up. And that's why we need you in the militia, because every single person in here can do that sort of thing. Anyway, thank you.
I got nothing else.
Thank you, guys. You know, and the one thing, thank you, Bernie. The one thing you've got to recognize, Bernie's what? A school teacher. Woody owns a barber shop. He's coached softball. Back there, Randy. His kids went to school with my kids. Poor Randy back there, though, his whole family is all women except him. He's the only guy I know that only has female animals. And then you take somebody like Ralph back there. I mean, Ralph is, you know, every time we needed help with any kind of event we did, he's ready to help. These guys come out. We have, I mean, they're friends, they're neighbors, they're us. That's the beauty of this. And the idea of today, too, is to understand the responsibility to protect our rights is up to us. It's not up to the police to protect us. How does 500,000 police protect 400 million people? I mean, seriously. We're going to hear some great stuff right now, and I'm really excited to hear it. So put on your seatbelt. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Baird.
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? My wife is laughing at me because I have my notes, and she laughs at me every time because she says you never use the notes. But if you'll forgive me, I need to use the notes tonight because there's a lot of stuff and I don't want to forget to say anything. So I want to start by I'm going to ask you some questions, and when you answer them, my purpose is not to embarrass anybody, to force an opinion out of anybody. I'm just curious as to what people think as we go through this. So the first question I'm going to ask, and you can answer just by raising your hand, yes or no, or shout, that's fine. The first question I want to ask is, are there any non-Christians in the room? And it's okay, it's not, I'm asking this for a very specific purpose. Okay, I don't see very many hands. But even if there are non-Christians in the room, I want the non-Christians to follow this as a legal argument. Now, I am a Christian. Jesus is my Lord. And so I have certain things that were given to me that were given to all citizens of this nation. And if you don't have faith in that, at least follow it as a lawyer would, because this is the legal argument that is the basis of our country. And that's very important to us because that's why the rules were invented, so that government would have to follow them. As John Adams said, liberty must at all hazards be supported. You have a right to it, derived from your maker. And even if that were not so, it was bought and purchased for you by your fathers with their ease, their estates, their treasure, and their blood. You have a basis for your rights given you by your Creator, by your Maker. Those rights are not rights that can be given away. They're not rights that can be sold. They're not rights you can give away. You can fail to exercise them, but they belong to you. They do not belong to government. They do not belong to government to change. They do not belong to government to enact policy over. They do not belong to government to denigrate those rights from a God-given gift placed in your heart at the moment of your creation to a mother may I permission slip at the whim of any elected official, any government official, any government body, or any government agency. Now, the first question I want to ask you is, if all that's true, what are we doing here right now? Because the problem with liberty is this: your liberty has a price. It's always had a price. Your fathers paid that price with their ease, their estates, their treasure, and their blood. Every generation has to pay that price. If you fail to pay the price, the next generation will have to pay twice. They'll have to pay for you, and they'll have to pay their own price. Because failure to pay that price is liberty lost. And that's why we're here today. We've already lost our liberty in the state of California. It's gone. It's gone because we didn't pay the price. And I'm not singling anybody out. I'm in this room too. It's gone because I failed to pay the price right along with you. That's why I'm here, because there is good news. We can get it back. We are the people mentioned in the Constitution. We have all the power. All just power is derived from the consent of the governed. We are the governed. We created this government, not the other way around. California was not a state filled with government waiting for you to show up so they could govern you. California was basically a land filled with all kinds of people: Native Americans, Spaniards, Russians, French. The British were out there trying to get money. Everybody was here trying to get money. Every fraud, crook, liar in the eastern United States came out to California to get money. Yeah, a lot of them are still here. I like that. I'm going to steal that. But the natural result of that is, after a fashion, people stand around and they say, look, we need some kind of rules here, because this just doesn't work. Everybody's shooting each other over their claim and stealing their stuff and stealing your life and your property. And in fact, several historians have told us that these rights that we have, these rights given us by our Creator, they predate government. And I can prove that. If you were alone and all you had was a skin that you wore, and you lived in the hole in the side of a mountain, would you not have the inherent inalienable right to protect your life? I mean, you're out there with saber-toothed tigers and bears and Lord knows what, and they have big teeth and claws, and you have none of those things. You don't have the ability. You can't outrun a bear. You can't outrun a saber-toothed tiger. You can't outrun a mountain lion. Heck, most of us can't outrun a badger. The way I'm going, I can't even outrun my old dog. So we have to form things in order to protect our lives, and those are weapons. And even Justice Ginsburg said the definition of a weapon is any instrument that can be borne. And the definition of borne, is to carry on your person, in your clothing, in your pocket, for the purpose of confrontation in the event of conflict. So you have the inalienable God-given right to protect your life with any instrument you choose that you carry upon your person in public for that purpose. Because how would it have worked if this caveman lived in a hole in the ground on the side of the Himalayas or wherever he lived, but he just knew that his weapon was only able to be used when he was in the hole. So when he left the hole, he left the club in there. And then he walked out into the world to do his business. That is obviously not what the framers intended with the guarantee to your already possessed God-given right. Obviously not. They could not have thought that, and they did not think that, and I can prove that too. On April the 18th, 1775, 70 men under the command of Captain John Parker and under the tutelage of Pastor Jonas Clark, and the night before, Sam Adams and John Hancock were sitting around with Jonas Clark in his house, and Hancock was scared. I mean, they knew that 70 regular soldiers. Now, they didn't say British. They were British. They weren't Americans. These guys were subjects of the King of England. They were not sovereign citizens like you're supposed to be. They were subject to the rules and laws of the king, even if that was their death. Because subjects don't have a say in things. They are subject to whatever rules their ruler wants to subject them to. They do, however, have inalienable God-given rights, and one of those, the very first among those, is the right to life and the protection of that life. Without that, if you can't protect your life, what's your life worth if somebody can come and take it anytime they want to? So John Hancock is worried, and he asked Jonas Clark, he said, hey, and I'm going to paraphrase, he said, hey man, are we going to be okay here? 700 of my government's best soldiers are on their way here to kill me and kill John here and take your powder and your shot. Why didn't I say guns right then? Because the guns belong to the individuals. The powder and shot were the only things stored in the magazine. Guns were not property of the community. Guns were individual property prior to the Constitution. So these British regulars show up, regular troops, the most powerful military on earth, and across the green stand 70 American militiamen. What made them militia? The fact that they showed up at church every Sunday and they had training. So Jonas Clark looks back at John Hancock and he says, there's no need to fear. I have been training these men for this moment all their lives. Think about that. They didn't have a mother may I slip from government. They didn't have a government-issued firearm. The government didn't say you can have a squirrel gun, but you can't have a .54 musket. The government didn't say no rifled barrels. Oh boy, those are unfair because they're too accurate. The government didn't say you can only have a knife that's 2 inches long. They didn't say any of that stuff because they had not the right to say that. These men had the inalienable right to defend themselves, their families, their community, their colony, and their nation. And that right was given them by God Almighty Himself. So are we asking the question today, is government taking the place of God because they pretend that your rights are theirs to give and take? That is the question we're asking. Is government going to take the place of God in your life? Or are you going to do something about it? And we can do something about it. So I want to ask just a few questions. First of all, is your family for sale? Is your honor or integrity for sale? Is your dignity for sale? Well, not unless you're on Judge Judy. Then your dignity is for sale, and it's pretty cheap too. Is the safety of your family and your community for sale? then why is it the state of California came and they took your right to carry a firearm and they didn't give you anything for it? They didn't ask your permission. They came and they took it. They took it first on May the 2nd of 1967 because a bunch of Black Panthers, and you know, I got my opinion of the Black Panthers. I was old enough to know what was going on. But these guys had a little demonstration on the steps of the Capitol building on May the 2nd, and they took a bunch of old pistols and shotguns and stuff, and they were marching around the Capitol. Nobody got shot, nobody got threatened. It was kind of a stupid political demonstration, but it was their right. And here's the problem with the constitutional republic. Even the minority has rights. That's why we're not a democracy. Because the minority has the right to do everything you have the right to do, whether you like it or not. You have to die to protect that right. So they demonstrated with guns, they went inside the Capitol, they scared the heck out of all the people in there, and then when the state police told them to, they all left. No one got shot, no one got threatened. I don't even know if the guns were loaded, they don't either. Then after they got back to Oakland, every single one of them was charged with a felony. What felony, you ask yourself? It was legal to carry the gun, it was legal to carry it loaded. Conspiracy. What was a conspiracy about? Well, it was just conspiracy. You conspired to do something that we, who sit in judgment of you and your rights and your liberty and your freedom, don't like. And you're guilty. And it's a felony. And you know what that means? They all lost their gun rights. Why? Over some really vague term called conspiracy. Heck, you know what? If the state of California, if the DOJ was back there in the corner, they could charge all of us with conspiracy. And they'd have no less ground to make that charge stick than they did against those lunatic Black Panthers. So, needless to say, after that, about a month later, the Oakland Assemblymen got together with one of the big gun organizations, and I'm not here to point fingers, and I'm an NRA member myself, and we have to, and I urge all of you, if you're not NRA members, join. I don't agree with the NRA every day, but they are the big gorilla in the room when it comes to lobbying, and we need that. We need that collective power. But they got with some of the gun orgs and they wrote legislation, and they banned the open carry of a loaded weapon in California. Now, unfortunately, when you strip a minority of the rights, you have to strip everybody. You lost your right to open carry of a loaded weapon in California in July of 1967 because the state was mad at 20 people that came from Oakland and had a demonstration. Is that constitutional republic? I think not. I think that's tyranny. And I think it's despotism. And we allowed it, and nobody said a word, and nobody filed a case against it. Now, I was just a kid, but I did know. And then time goes by and people forget that they once were able to do something they're now not able to do, and then it's lost to memory. Then again, you had the right to open carry an unloaded weapon as late as January 1st of 2012 for pistols and January 1st of 2013 for long guns. And we used to do it all the time on the ranch. You strap your gun on, you had your magazine on the other hip, and it wasn't great, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't a right, but at least you had the thing if you needed it. And then in 2012, a state assemblyman at the time, Anthony Portantino, whose sole claim to fame, this catapulted him into the national stage in California politics, he was the art director on the Grizzly Adams TV show. And that made him famous, and he won in his district in Glendale, and then he made the statement on the assembly floor, this isn't the Old West, and you don't need a gun to go buy a cheeseburger. And then he introduced the bill to ban the open carry of an unloaded pistol, and all of his Democratic buddies passed that. And you then lost the right to carry an unloaded pistol. And then 1 year later, he thought, well, that was pretty good. So he got another bill passed, and you lost the right to carry an unloaded long gun. So the open carry of any form of operable weapon is now against the law in California. That is the Second Amendment, right? So the state of California banned the Second Amendment in 2012 and 2013, and nobody said a word. Not me. Not anybody, We just let the most important liberty we had die on that date, and we never made a move to stop it. So I want to ask a couple more questions. Do you trust a government that doesn't trust you with the same tools they have? Gosh, that was a tough one. I want to ask you also, what is the legitimate role of government, and what is the price of liberty? Because that's the price we didn't pay. Well, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. That's the price we pay for liberty. But with eternal vigilance comes the responsibility of action when we see something go wrong. What good does it do you to see something and not do anything about it? None. So we have failed in that responsibility, and we're going to fix that starting tonight. Now, we want to do that for many reasons. First of all, I owe my son a duty. And it's the only duty that I'm given in the Constitution of the United States. It's the only one as a citizen I can fulfill. And that is to secure the blessings of liberty for my posterity. That's my job. How do I know that? How can I prove that? And by the way, don't take anything I say at face value. Please do some research, look it up. It doesn't do any good for me to yammer at you and you to walk out of here and just say, oh wow, that was great yammering. Look this up and solidify it in your own mind. It's easy. These documents are all over the place. So if we have the responsibility to secure liberty for our posterity, and we fail to do that, how can we rectify that situation? Well, we have all the power. That's how. We're the people. Article 2, Section 1 of the California Constitution says that whenever government fails to serve the people, they have the right and the responsibility to alter or reform government whenever the public good demands. It doesn't say at the next referendum. It doesn't say elect a better dude. It says whenever government fails to serve you, you have the right to alter or reform government. Guess what? The Declaration of Independence also says that. I mean, is the Constitution our founding document? No, it's not. The Constitution's our second try. Because the Constitution says something funny. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. Well, what an odd thing to say. Why wouldn't it just say, we, the people of the United States, in order to form a perfect union? It says more perfect. Because it wasn't our first try. The Articles of Confederation were our first try. They didn't work. We had 10 presidents of the United States before the Constitution. But in that process, we figured out where we went wrong, and I believe the men who authored the Constitution were divinely inspired. And I believe that with all my heart. And I'll go to my grave defending that document from any usurper. And I don't care what he calls himself, senator, congressman, mayor, I don't care who that is. They will not cross that line in the sand with me, ever. Well, I have the power to do anything about it. And I have been all over the world, by the way. I've flown for a military contract airline for 28 years into 6 conflicts for the United States government. And I want to tell you something. The difference between this nation and most of the world is this. In most of the world, particularly the undeveloped world, you can be walking down the street with a lot of other people and someone would pick up a brick and kill you for a nickel that you have in your pocket and no one would even slow down while he was doing it. That's the difference between the United States of America and most of the undeveloped world. And I've seen it with my own eyes. It's true. And we will become like that if we allow it. We cannot allow those things to happen. So Thomas Paine said, it follows as a natural result and a logical result that the governmental exercise of any power not authorized by the Constitution, the exercise of any power not authorized by the Constitution is an assumed power and it is therefore illegal. This is really an important point. The Constitution was not intended to protect you from all the ills of the world. It wasn't. It was not intended, the Constitution was not intended to be the vehicle that stands between you and all evil of unsafe baby carriages and dirty air and dirty water and cars that don't get enough mileage and plastic straws and whether pigs and fish want to get married and where they should live after they do it and all of those things. The Constitution was meant to protect you from one thing and one thing only, and that is human nature. And human nature never changes. It is the nature of human beings who gain power to get more power. And in gaining that power, they strip you of your liberty. And the Second Amendment is all that stands between us and that fact, because in most of the known world, they do not have the right to keep and bear arms. And government can do anything it wants to its people. And if you doubt that, look at Venezuela, look at Mexico, look at, I don't care where you point your finger at the map, Rwanda, South Sudan, Eritrea, Libya, I could go on and on and on. Those are just the places where I've seen it happen. That will not happen here if we stand. And it matters. It does matter. Because we owe it to future generations to hand them a country that is essentially in the same shape as the one that we got. That's our duty. Let's not fail. How can we do that? California has already taken our Second Amendment rights. They're gone. That's a fact. We can exercise those rights anyway, and I'm okay with that, and I do it every day on my ranch and pretty much wherever I go, but you can end up in jail for it. So what we need to do is we need to fix this, and we need to do it in a way that involves as little jail time, bloodshed, turmoil, chaos as possible. And that's through the legal process, and we can do it. Because the state of California has a big problem right now. George Young walked into court one day, or he walked into the Hawaii Police Department one day, and he asked the chief of police, he says, I want a permit to carry a gun. Some guys are after me. And he says, well, what kind of permit you want? And George says, I don't care, just give me, I just want to be able to carry a gun. So the guy says, well, here, fill out these papers for a concealed carry permit. What is a permit? It's permission. It's a mother may I slip from the government. Mother, may I please have a cookie? No. You can have a cookie, but you can only have one this big. You have to leave it locked up in the garage, in a safe, disassembled, by the way. The cookie can't be together. And then when you're at home, and only at home, and only when you feel like your life is threatened, you can get the cookie out, put all the pieces together, and take a bite. That's what a permission slip is. Because anything the government gives you permission for, the government can take that permission away. So George goes and he gets the concealed carry permit, and then after that, the chief of police for the county of Hawaii, which is the entire island, the big island of Hawaii, he says, well, you can't have that permit. And George said, well, why not? And he says, because we've never ever given one of those out. And we're not going to start with you. So he says, okay, well, give me the other kind. What's the other kind? And the chief says, open carry, exposed. Well, give me one of those then. And he says, are you a police officer? George says, no. He says, are you a security guard? George says, no. He says, well, we're not giving you one of those either. Well, fortunately for us, thank God for George, because he sued him. And he went through the trial court. You know what the trial court said? Well, the state is sovereign over you. Wow, huh? I mean, let that sink in for a second. You don't have rights equal to the state. The state has the right to deny you anything they want to or regulate anything they want to, because in the balanced interest of the populace, we have the right to say, you don't need the right to have that gun. It's more important for us to keep people safe, and if we think people feel safer, then you can't have the gun. That's how they do that. So George went to the Ninth Circuit Court, and God bless Judge O'Scanlan, because George got Judge O'Scanlan. Now, Judge O'Scanlan was the very guy who sat on the Peruta v. San Diego case. And I don't know if you guys remember that, but Peruta v. San Diego was the NRA and Second Amendment Foundation and Cal Guns and all the big gun organizations, because quite frankly, the big gun organizations don't support open carry. They never have. That worm is turning, though. More good news. The good news keeps coming here. So in Peruta v. San Diego, a couple of guys wanted concealed carry permits. The government said no. They sued. It got all the way to the Ninth Circuit. They drew Judge O'Scanlan. And Judge O'Scanlan said, well, in California, you can't carry a gun open. because it's against the law. So therefore, you have to give these guys a concealed carry permit. But even Judge O'Scanlan kind of didn't get it, because you have a right to something. You shouldn't have to ask anybody for that, right? But anyway, they did, and O'Scanlan says you have to give these guys a permit. Well, he ruled. That was the law. Boy, the state of California freaked out. And so did all the judges in the Ninth Circuit. Holy moly, we just can't have the government having to give these permits out to anybody that wants one. So they formed an in-bank panel, and it was one judge. They call that sua sponte. One judge said, I want to rehear this case, and I want the whole court to rehear it. So they got 19 judges or whatever it was, and they reheard the case. Well, guess what they said? No. Concealed carry, and I gotta say, I don't agree with the Ninth Circuit Court very often, but they're right about this one. Concealed carry is not a right. It falls wholly outside the Second Amendment. States can regulate it, states can ban it, states can do whatever they want with it. You do not have the right to hide a gun on you. You never did. And I gotta say, since 1791, there has never been a court case that affirmed the right to conceal carry a weapon. Never. And the Second Amendment Foundation and the NRA has had 8 or 10 of these cases, and they lost every single one of them because concealed carry is not a right. Well, that brings us to the really good part. There's only 2 ways to carry the darn gun. Either hide it or don't. Concealed carry is not a right. Well, what does that mean? It means open carry is, because no state may deny a citizen his enumerated rights. DC versus Heller, City of Chicago versus McDonald, Cruikshank versus United States. Open carry is the core right of the Second Amendment, and in fact, in Cruikshank v. United States, it says, open carry is a core right of the Second Amendment, and it is wholly undependent upon that document because it predates the Constitution. And it is also unconnected with militia service. Let's whip back to April 18th of 1776 now, or 1775, I'm sorry. Where did those guys get the guns that they walked down to the green with? Off the mantle, behind the door, out of the closet. They were their guns. They weren't the government's guns. And they were any gun those guys had. In fact, their service in the militia was presupposed that they owned certain things already. They had to own the gun, 25 rounds of ammunition, a powder horn, a possibles bag, and several other things. So you had to have that stuff or you couldn't even join the militia. Well, that tells me something. The Second Amendment predates the militia, predates the Constitution. It predates everything. It predates government. That is your right to life and protect that life. So now we come down the pike and we see that certain Supreme Court cases, Heller versus DC, open carry is the core right of the Second Amendment. And concealed carry is not. Open carry is the core right, according to Heller, so that it prevents unmanly and secret assassinations. In other words, if you wear your gun on the outside of your pants, then everybody can see it and everybody knows what your intentions are and everybody can see whether you have something in mind or not. That's always been the way in this country, always. The only exceptions for concealed carry were people who were on a journey, because the supposition was you're wearing lots of clothes, it's cold, you're on a train, you stuff the gun in your pocket. That was okay. But it was never considered okay for you to hide your gun when you were walking around, never. So, Peruta is right. The en-banc reversal of the Peruta case was correct. And the Supreme Court saw it because they refused to hear that case. So the NRA, the Second Amendment Foundation, Cal Guns, CRPA, all of those guys that wrote amicus in Peruta, all wrong. So let's put that aside now. Concealed carry is not a right, open carry is. Here comes George Young. He goes through the federal court. The federal court says, no, George, you're nuts. States can do whatever they want to you. He appeals. He draws Judge O'Scanlan. So here's Judge O'Scanlan, one of the true patriots and conservatives on the Ninth Circuit Court, and God bless that guy. And he says, well, okay, I'll give this another shot. If concealed carry isn't the right, then open carry must be, because states can't ban an enumerated right. So he gives George Young, he says, open carry is the core right of the Second Amendment, and it applies outside the home. In other words, it applies to public places. In fact, Ruth Bader Ginsburg in Satano versus Massachusetts says, the state may not debar a person from carrying arms because if they did, then your right to defense would be the property of the state, and states are often more interested in disarming you than they are in keeping you safe. Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that. She's one of the craziest judges on the court, and she knows it. In fact, in Satano versus Massachusetts, they said you cannot prevent, states may not prevent a person from walking about armed. Wow, I mean, that's huge. And still nothing in California, nothing. Here we are with no right. So Young goes to court, O'Scanlan rules for him. That's the Ninth Circuit, it's law. How come we're not packing our gun? Because California won't observe the law unless it suits them. Now, we were talking earlier, and I was saying, what if the Young case had to do with plastic straws and ruining the environment? Well, California would be all over that. Oh, well, look, the Ninth Circuit says plastic straws are no good. No more plastic straws, everybody. But because it's your right that's in question, they are hiding under the table. Now, here's a problem for us. You cannot compel a state to stop enforcing an unconstitutional law unless you sue them. So here we're coming to the crux of the matter. So Young goes through. Now, people are panicked. The state of California is panicked. Oh my God. The people in California might just start walking around with guns again. And remember, 6 years ago, we could walk around with a gun. But that was 6 years ago, and it's a more dangerous world now. We can't have that, can we? So the state of California and the state of Hawaii have appealed to the Ninth Circuit, and they are asking for Young versus Hawaii to be reheard in bank. In bank means by all the judges. If the court accepts that case to be reheard in bank, then what I'm talking about here tonight will go away. It won't happen. But I don't think they will. And the reason I don't think they will is this. It's pretty simple. First of all, think about the gun grabbers on the court and their mentality. What if they rehear Young versus Hawaii and they reverse it? And they say, you don't have the right to carry a loaded weapon, exposed. They just got done saying you don't have the right to carry a concealed weapon. So now what the court would say in bank, you don't have a Second Amendment. That's going to go to the Supreme Court for sure. And guess who wrote the opinion in Heller versus D.C.? Kavanaugh. And George Young's case was modeled on Kavanaugh's opinion. It's almost identical. It's almost word for word. So in the mind of the gun grabbers, I'll put myself in one of the gun grabbers' places, and I'll say to myself, gosh, if we reverse Young and it goes to the Supreme Court, there will be permit-less open carry of an exposed and loaded weapon in all 50 states of the United States. But, amen. Amen to that. But if we fail to rehear Young, it's already permitted in about 8 or 9 states of the Ninth Circuit, so all we'd have to lose is maybe California and maybe Hawaii, quite frankly. So if we do nothing on Young, and the governments of Hawaii and California hide under the desk, then nothing really changes. I mean, Young is the law. We're not packing our pistols on the outside of our shirt. So what does California have to lose in this deal? And the answer to that is nothing. That's the truth, unless we act. And here's what I propose to do. I propose to get a restraining order against the state of California to bar them from enforcing unconstitutional laws, and those laws are 25-850, the carry of a loaded weapon, exposed carry of a loaded weapon, PC 26-350, the exposed carry of an unloaded weapon, and 26-400, the exposed carry of a weapon that's not a pistol, in other words, a long gun. So if I go into court and I say, Young versus Hawaii is the rules, that's your Ninth Circuit, they have jurisdiction over you, And I want the court to tell you it is unconstitutional for you to continue to enforce laws 26,850, 26,350, and 26,400 that are unconstitutional, that are now unconstitutional. And California just says, well, yeah, but we're not doing that. Well, there's also a Ninth Circuit case that's pretty interesting. It's called Chambers versus United States. And that case says that any opinion that issues in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is binding on every single judge in the circuit, and that includes trial courts, especially trial courts, even if the mandate was never published. And that was a Ninth Circuit in-bank case that was never appealed. That is the law. So Young versus Hawaii is the law right now. California's hiding. Chambers versus U.S. says that's the law and it applies to you judges. And we walk into a federal court and say, Young is the law, and Chambers says you have to obey it. I want a temporary restraining order against the state of California to force them to stop enforcing the unconstitutional penal codes that have taken my Second Amendment rights. And then after the temporary restraining order expires in 2 weeks, have the lawyer come back and make it a temporary or a permanent injunction, as whatever the case may be. Now, the judge might say, well, what if Young is reheard? Well, what if it is? It hasn't been yet, and it hasn't been accepted for rehearing yet, and it may never be accepted for rehearing because the court cannot deny an enumerated right, and they've already said concealed carry is not a right. So this court would have to reverse itself in bank in order to make any of that stuff happen. Now, the state of California has a really weird legal theory that they're advancing in order to do this. And that is that states may regulate, and this is the first time I ever heard this, public carry. They're not talking about concealed or open. The fact that you want to carry in public, no matter how that is, states can regulate that or ban it or make you ask permission for it. If we allow that, shame on every single gun-owning citizen of the state of California, and by all reports there are about 7 million of us. If we don't stand up and act now, we will lose the opportunity and lose the right to act in the future, because a liberty unexercised is a liberty lost. So I'm here tonight to ask all of you for your help. My wife and I have already written a fairly sizable check to the attorney, but we're not rich people. And this isn't an expensive case as federal cases go. Not expensive. I'm going to say $25,000. That's really expensive, but not as courts go. And I need help to finish this deal. And we hope that it'll go fairly quickly. It's just a temporary restraining order and an injunction. I have to write a case. There's no depositions. There really aren't any witnesses. Young versus Hawaii, Chambers versus U.S. And let me emphasize something. How many of you think the police have the duty to protect you? Raise your hand. Pretty educated bunch here. They do not. And here's the sad part. They will suffer no liability for failing to protect you. California Government Code Section 821, 845, and 846 tell us that the government of California has no duty to protect a specific individual from crime or violence or anything else for that matter. And further, you may not sue any state employee if he fails to protect you, even when he knew you were under direct threat. You can't sue him if he arrested a dangerous person and let that person go and then that person came and harmed you. You can't sue him if you made repeated complaints to the police department and they knew you were under direct and imminent threat and you were in fact harmed and you sued them. You would lose. And there are many, many Supreme Court cases that tell me that. Warren versus D.C. 3 women in an apartment, brutalized over a period of hours and hours after repeated calls to 911. What did the Supreme Court say to them? The government has no duty to protect the individual. Duchesne versus Winnebago County, a gal who called because her husband was threatening to kill their children after a nasty divorce. The police advised her to move. We can't help you, move. The children were murdered right in front of her. She sued the police department because she had a protective order. She had a restraining order. The guy violated it time and time again. She said, "Save me." They said, "We can't help you." Supreme Court agreed. The government has no duty to protect you, and they will suffer no liability for failing to protect you. And Mrs. Ducheney even claimed a special relationship. "I have a protective order." And they said, "No. The only special relationship under which a police officer has to protect you is if you are a prisoner and you've been physically deprived of your liberty." That's true. If I, as a police officer, take your liberty away from you, physically with handcuffs, it is now my responsibility to protect you because I have deprived you of the ability to do it yourself. What has the state of California done to you? Done the same thing. They just didn't use the handcuffs yet. They still have them though. So Riss versus New York, same thing. A guy threw a bucket of lye in the gal's face. She called the police 100 times, and they said, "Why don't you?" In fact, the police in the Riss versus New York case, they even told her, "Stop being nasty to the guy. Maybe he'll be nicer to you." She was permanently blinded and disfigured, sued the government, and they said the government has no duty to protect you. Again and again and again and again. In Citano versus Massachusetts, this was a great case because the gal had a really nasty boyfriend. One day at her work, and this is important for us, one day at her work she whips out a stun gun because he was coming to beat the tar out of her again, and she says, "I will shock you to within an inch of your life if you don't leave me alone." The guy got scared and ran away. But one of her coworkers saw her with a stun gun and called the police, and they arrested her and charged her with a felony. Because in Massachusetts, you cannot carry an exposed weapon, or excuse me, in Illinois. I'm sorry, no, it was Massachusetts. You can't carry an exposed weapon. And she won, and that was big for us. States cannot debar a citizen from bearing arms for their own defense, because the state has more of an interest in disarming you than it does in keeping you safe. That's it, folks. We can win this. We must win this. We can start restoring liberty in California with this action alone. And if we can do this, we can do more. If you can help us do this, we can turn to the rest of California and say, if you'd like the rest of your liberty back, help us. Get off your lazy backside and show up and start helping. And that's my goal. Let's restore liberty here. You know, I'll close with this. It was Christmas, I think, 1776. And George Washington, it was Christmas Day, and he was sitting in his office. And he was writing furiously on these scraps of paper, and then he'd tear off and write something else. And Dr. Joseph Warren walked in the office to talk to old George. They were kind of pals, a little bit. And one of the scraps fell on the ground. And George and Doc Warren picked it up. He said, "What is this?" And George says, "It's the password for the attack tonight." And Dr. Warren picks that up, and he reads it. And it says, "Liberty or death." Then those guys walked 7 miles, most of them barefoot, crossed a river choked with ice, walked 7 miles back to Trenton, and surprised one of the most well-trained, and believe me, the story is the Hessians were drunk. They were not drunk. They were very devout Protestants. They did not drink. Colonel Rahl was not drunk. They were asleep. And in fact, the only thing, God's intervention in Georgia's success, was that the weather was so nasty, horrible, that the German colonel thought no sane man would ever attack in this kind of weather. And he literally, for his day, he was right. So he just went to bed, and they didn't set up outposts. And those men won the day. Not because they were better than us, right? I mean, are we less than them? Are we dumber than they were? Are we less courageous than they are? Are we less courageous than John Parker and his men standing there staring at 700 of his own government's troops across the green? Do we not have that stuff in us? I mean, Patrick Henry asked in the Virginia Burgesses, he said, "What would gentlemen have What would you have? In a perfect world, and I'm asking you, what is it you want? And the guys there that day said, well, we want peace. We just want peace. And he said, well, there is no peace. Aren't you listening? Aren't you paying attention? Our comrades are in war now. He said, is life so sweet or peace so dear to be purchased at the price of slavery and chains? Almighty God forbid it, for I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. I'm asking you tonight, is there a line in the sand for you, and what is it? Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'd like to bring up Patrick Jones right now. He owns a local gun store here and is very well versed on everything. Patrick brings to light and brings a view of somebody who not only understands the laws, but he's somebody who is in a business that probably is more regulated than anything else you can think of. And he is going to enlighten us on this stuff. So, ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Jones.
All right, thank you, Terry. So I am Patrick Jones. I've worked in a gun shop over 40 years. I grew up in Jones's Fort off of Cypress Avenue, so over 40 years selling guns in California. And so I'm going to, in just a minute, I'll talk about some of the new rules, some of the existing laws, some of the issues with our new driver's licenses that you might already be experiencing. But before I talk about some of those laws, I want to talk about a small story. Sterling Finn, about 20 years ago, he called me up, and Sterling was the producer of the Red and Gun Show, which I'm now the producer of the Red and Gun Show. But Sterling called me up and he said, hey, there's this guy out front. His name is Sheriff Richard Mack, and he wants to sell his books out front, but we've heard he's radical, and we're not sure if we want to allow him to sell his books. And I said, well, I know he's pro-gun. He's took on the Brady bill, and I know he took on the Clintons. So I said I would let him. I don't know much about him. I said I too have heard he was a radical, but he is pro-gun, so I think you should let him sell his books. So he did, but I thought, you know, I've never met the guy, so I should go down there and take a look. So I drove a mile over there. He was just wrapping up. I listened to him speak for 5 minutes, and what I found was this guy was not a radical, but he was a pure patriot. He took on the Clinton administration. He was a newly elected sheriff in his county in Arizona. He swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and he read the Brady bill from front to back. That's over 2,000 pages, and he knew it was unconstitutional, but he had now a problem because he swore an oath to uphold the Constitution, and he could not do that. He went to the NRA and asked them, we have to fight this. This is completely unconstitutional, and this needs to be changed. They agreed with him. However, they said, you're going to try to take on the Clinton administration and try to take this to the United States Supreme Court. The costs are astounding, and we just can't help every case like that, so you're on your own. So he sold his house. His wife was not very happy. Only 2 other sheriffs in the entire country joined him. Well, he fought all the way to the Supreme Court, and he won. And it proves to you what Mark Beard is doing, that one guy, against the odds, having to risk his life, liberty, and fortune to do what's right. And Sheriff Richard Mack did that. Now, the national media called him a radical, and so did I. But the reality was what we're hearing in the media is not only wrong, but it's completely wrong. And one guy took on the Brady bill. The Brady bill, I don't know if you remember that, but it had to do with all kinds of banning different guns and magazines, and in there it was to be overseen by the Hong Kong police. And no one seemed to care, except Richard Mack and 2 other sheriffs. But it shows what a dedicated person like Mark Beard can do, and that's why we're going to help him come January 12th. Now, I've been involved in hunter conservation. We do lots of banquets, but there's no more banquets that are more important than what we're trying to do here, and that is support your Second Amendment right and your right to open carry. And this Young versus Hawaii case is a huge opportunity for us. It wouldn't have been possible without Heller and the McDonald case, but because of those cases, now cases like Young will come forward. And if we do not act on them, then we will not secure our Second Amendment for ourselves and for the future. So we don't want to leave Mark hanging. We don't want to make Mark have to sell his house, because I know his wife would be very pissed. Very pissed. But we can raise that money, and all we have to do is show up, and we're going to have some great things there. So we want you, and it's just the neighboring county in Siskiyou County, so we can make that drive on January 12th, and we can support that event. We can win some nice things. There's going to be general raffle guns. There's going to be a live auction. There's going to be a silent auction. There might even be a pie or two, so you can take advantage of all of that. And we'd like to see a crowd like this there. So that's January 12th. We have the flyers at the back, so at least take a flyer on your way out. If you can't do it yourself, at least spread the word that we need to get people up there, and we need people to support and throw a little money so Mark can get this thing done. It's tough for a guy like me to follow Mark. Let's give Mark another big round of applause. You know, if he can rattle off those cases, how much time that he's devoted into making sure that his children have a free country to live in. Now, unfortunately, we're here in California, and the firearm rules are going to get tougher and tougher. We've seen a lot of stuff happen in the last 10 years, and we're unfortunately going to have Gavin Newsom come January 7th, and that's not going to be a little deal. He has vowed to make this a gun-free state, and he's not kidding. He's got, if not a supermajority, he clearly has the Senate and the Assembly at his hands. He is working, as we speak right now, to come out in the first 100 days to do just that, a gun-free state, and he will hit you in every way possible. He is going to make it his life's mission to have this a gun-free state. Now, he has not said what exactly he's going to do, but there are many things. For example, he already worked on a bill that the governor vetoed 4 years ago, but he, of course, will sign this bill. All handguns coming into the state and all handguns private party transferred must be deemed safe, which means rostered. If you're familiar with the handgun roster in California, it's very small. There's very little guns on there. And basically what it means is no handguns coming into the state, very few handguns being able to be even sold. It means you would have to sell your older handgun out of the state. Couldn't sell it here within that state. That's just one law. He has 100 of those proposed. How about for every gun that's registered to you, you pay a $50 tax every year, just like your automobile. How many guns you want to own when you're paying $50 per gun per year? That is a great tool if you're an anti-gunner, because it's going to really discourage you from having a lot of guns. And certainly for people that collect, you could no longer lawfully do that or financially do it either. Those are just some of the things that they're contemplating doing, and they have the Senate and Assembly, and they'll pass them. Now, we'll have to fight them, but it's a lifelong struggle to fight. The two laws that did just pass, the governor on his way out, Governor Brown, he did sign two laws. One, you will have to be 21 now to buy a firearm, handgun or long gun. So it was 18 and 21. That was a federal law. We'll challenge that. But now an 18, a 19, and 20-year-old cannot buy a long gun. So we lost that opportunity. And then on top of that, he has now said for everybody that has a concealed weapon permit, you will have to have training with each handgun and qualify with each handgun for your initial class. And every time you renew, every 2 years, you will have to train and qualify with every handgun to a requirement set forth by your sheriff. This week, our sheriff has set those requirements. So now, when you go renew, and also the sheriff has said you have to renew within 1 month of your permit expiring, no earlier. Your certificate for your class of completion of that also has to be within 1 month. These are the kinds of restrictions that we're now having to live with to make it harder on you, to make it more difficult, and to reduce the numbers of concealed weapon permit holders. The requirements now appears, and it also on his information sheet said calibers of .380 or larger. So if you have any 22s or 32s or a .327 federal on your permit, it appears that you will no longer be able to have those on your permit. And if you don't like any of these things, you should talk to your sheriff. The qualifications that the Sheriff Bazinko has set is that you will have to holster your gun, shoot 5 rounds, reholster your gun, another 5 rounds, reholster another 5 rounds, reholster another 5 rounds. For 20 rounds at 7 yards, you have to hit in the 9 ring 80% of the time at 7 yards. So it's not a huge distance, but you'll have to do that with each handgun that you have, or it will not be a gun that will be placed on your permit. If you cannot do that with any gun, your permit will be revoked. So that's what we have coming up in January 1st. If your permit is going to expire in December, you can take your renewal class now, and you can renew this month without having those requirements, at least for 2 more years. But these are the kinds of things that we're having to deal with today, and you can see it's only going to get tougher. The governor that signed this bill, his intent was to ultimately take the issuance of the permits away from the sheriff and make it a state-issued permit. And at that point, they can deny you for lack of cause, like we've seen elsewhere. And like Mr. George found out, he was denied for lack of cause because he wasn't smart enough, or whatever the reasons that government wants to create. So we're getting closer and closer and closer to that. And that's why I think it's so important to stand up today, now, at least for open carry. And I encourage people, as that becomes a reality and as open carry becomes the law for all of us, to be able to do that. I know a lot of us, we've been carrying concealed. I carry concealed now. I use my ankle holster, and I've gotten pretty comfortable with that. But we'll need to get comfortable with carrying exposed. And if it makes someone else feel uncomfortable, too bad. And the more that we carry, the people that feel uncomfortable will leave. And that's a good thing. We should not have to feel uncomfortable because someone else is feeling uncomfortable. That's their problem, that's not our problem. People have said, well, I don't like everybody carrying a gun. Well, and I've told people this, that people are either going to be 2 things. They're either going to be good or they're going to be bad. And whether they have a gun or do not have a gun, that still exists. They're going to either be good or they're going to be bad. It doesn't matter. If you want to be bad, you don't need a gun. I was hoping after 9/11 that fact would be very, very well known. Look what motivated people did to us on our soil without firing a single shot. If you're going to be bad, you're going to be bad. But the media has changed that, and they've made the term gun violence. They use a new term now. It's not just violence. They don't talk about when somebody takes a screwdriver to somebody or a knife, but they certainly talk about a gun. And it's very deliberate, because they're trying to take your guns away every day, every day. Now, unfortunately, in California, we live in a state where there's 40 million people. And unfortunately, most of them are liberal, anti-gun thinking people. Possibly not by choice, but when you listen to that liberal media for your entire life, you're going to have no choice but believe that, what you hear. No choice. My wife's mother, she lives in Napa. She's 90 years old. And she thinks that we should blow up all the gun companies. Of course, I'm married to her daughter. I'm a gun dealer, so that doesn't go well at Thanksgiving. But in asking her, her daughter, my wife, said, Mom, I have a permit. I carry a gun every day. And she goes, well, I just don't think I could shoot anybody. And then Lori says, well, what if I was being raped? And then she goes, well, then I would. So there's no real logic. You can't have a good conversation with a person when they have such logic. You're not going to be able to change their minds. There's no way for me to change her mother's mind. Her mother has been fed that diet for so long. She's not dumb. She's educated. She's smart. She's a lovely old lady. But she's not going to change her mind with regards to firearms and guns because of the media and that onslaught. And it gets worse because they even scoff at the Constitution, and if we don't support the Constitution, then we have nothing. And she believes in a changing Constitution as well. And unfortunately, we have over 35 million of such in California, so we have a big problem here, and it's why we must split this state. There we go. So we have a lot of problems in the short term, but I tell people this, that we can't stop fighting, that if we stop fighting, and I've had a ton of customers and friends that have moved, and they, in a day's drive, you can get to Idaho or you can get to Nevada, you can get to Oregon. In a day's drive, you can get a lot of freedom, but it's going to follow you. The tyranny will follow you. You only have freedom for a while. This is a fight that we have to fight here now, because if we don't, it's a disease and it will spread to those areas. Look at Boise. Look at some of the cities already in Nevada and in Oregon. They're already starting to fall. That mentality, as cities get big, they get liberal. We have to fight this disease wherever we go. And so while you can run to another state, eventually it will catch you. Unless you're 98 years old, then maybe it won't. But if you're younger than that, it's going to catch you in your lifetime. And we need to fight it here for the next generation. We have to think about the youngsters, what they're going to be facing. Can you imagine what it could look like in 50 years from now if we don't stand up and protect the Constitution, our liberties today? We have that chance. So I appreciate you having me. I always hate following Mark Beard because he does such a great job, but we have a great opportunity come January 12th to help that become a reality. Let's get this suit going. Let's help him pay for that, and I'd like to see every one of you there. Thank you.
Patrick, can you remain up there, buddy? Have a seat. We're going to have these two guys sit up here, and we're going to have a Q&A session. So line up on each side, and we'll start the Q&A, and just direct your question to whoever on the stage you want to answer it.
Mark.
Yes.
I'm all for open carry, 100%. But I'm wondering, you know, right now, criminals, felons, they can't have a gun, and I'm good with that. How's that going to work with open carry? How are you going to decipher? Is the state going to decide who can open carry, who's a criminal, who's not a criminal?
Well, look, criminals don't open carry now. They stick the gun in their pants, or they hide it in their shirt, or wherever they want to, and they're not asking anybody's permission at all. And if there's exposed carry, I quite frankly doubt that criminals will carry exposed. They'll continue to shove it down their pants because they don't want anybody to know what they're going to do before they do it. Now, a lot of people say, well, isn't concealed carry tactically superior? You know, maybe it is on a lot of occasions. Maybe the element of surprise is a good thing, but it isn't a right. And the court has said so again and again and again. So what we need to do is we need to recapture that liberty by capitalizing on the right that we do have. And hopefully, like Patrick says, if we can teach people that it's not a big deal every time they see a gun, and like I said, 6 years ago, we all did it and nobody cared. I go to Oregon all the time. People open carry, nobody cares. But the criminals are still criminals. They're still evil, just like Patrick said. They're going to do whatever it is they do, whether we have the right to open carry or not.
Well, you know, if I was a criminal and I wanted to fit in and everybody's carrying, I'd carry.
Well, then,
you know, I mean,
then when everybody's concealed carry, you'd concealed carry. What changes? The behavior doesn't change, just the method of the behavior.
Yeah, but it just seems to me that if it's open carry for everybody, there should be some restrictions on criminals.
Well, there already is. It's already the law that felons can't possess a gun. So that's already the law.
Is that still going to be there?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, those laws don't change.
Felons?
No, it only changes the right of a law-abiding citizen to carry an exposed weapon. It doesn't change, it doesn't give a felon permission to carry a weapon at all.
Does it say in the Second Amendment that if you're a criminal, you can't carry?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, but it does say that in court cases that date back to 1800. So what Heller said was the Constitution is interpreted textually, historically, and culturally. And so what they did was a very detailed analysis going back long before the Constitution into English common law, and they found that certain things that were true were textual, they were historical, they were cultural. Those things are allowed, other things are not. For example, it's never been the right of a criminal to carry a firearm either concealed or exposed. And so those parts of the Second Amendment aren't really changed. The right of the people to keep and bear arms means the right of law-abiding people, not of criminals.
Thank you. I'm glad you got that covered.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Don't laugh at me.
No one's laughing. That's a valid question, and you have a right to ask it.
I have a question over here. You're having the January 12th dinner, and your total bargain of what you're looking for. Tell me, how much money are you looking for?
The attorney has said that because this is a TRO to be converted to one form of injunction, either permanent or temporary, or another, that this is a relatively inexpensive case as federal cases go. Her estimate is 30,000 is a high, 20,000 would be the low, and around 25 is what we need.
So you're looking for 30,000?
Yeah,
I just want to make
ideally,
sure
yes,
that the
that's
people
correct.
understand.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We'd take a check.
Yeah.
We
I think we can take credit cards too.
So Mark, is your legal action you're going to do, is it based on either 18 U.S. Code 242, the civil action for deprivation of rights, or 42 U.S. Code 1983, which is the deprivation of rights under color of law?
That's a great question.
Is it, and if not, are there any actions we can take under those codes?
Yeah, that's a great question, because here's the deal. The sheriffs of the state of California have the ability to, in counties with less than 200,000 people, have the ability to issue a 26150B2 permit for open carry only within the county. So part of my standing, in order to achieve standing, I've asked the sheriffs of 2 different counties to give me a 26150B2. Because if I walk into court and the judge says, well, did you ever ask for the right to carry? Well, the first thing I'd say is I don't have to ask for a right. But the second thing I'd say, but while you're on the subject, Your Honor, yes, I did. I asked for this right. Now, my sheriff won't give me one of those. The Sacramento County Sheriff wouldn't give me one because he couldn't, because the law only applies to counties with less than 200,000 people. So, if my sheriff has a turn of heart and he gives me a 26150B2, now it becomes an equal protection claim under Title 42, because I would be arrested in Shasta County for something I'm allowed to do in Siskiyou County. If he says no to the permit, now it's a Title 18, 241, 242, because it's a deprivation of rights case. So that's a great question, but it kind of depends how things unfold.
Thank you.
Drake, over here. You mentioned that the sheriff has already came out with a list of requirements for renewing. Where can that be obtained? And then secondly, if we re-elect another sheriff, can his requirements be also changed, increased or decreased?
Well, so first, you can get that information online, Shasta County Sheriff's Department requirements. It's on there this week, so it was just on there starting maybe 2 days ago. I've not been able to talk to the sheriff personally yet and ask if this requirement was a collaboration of many counties or just his sole requirements, and would he be willing to change some of those if we find difficulty with some of those. And those are questions yet to be asked. We were hoping the sheriff would be here tonight to be able to ask those questions. He is not here, so we can't ask them. So there's a lot of unknowns yet. Even the requirement, caliber requirement, I thought was poor. The gal at the Sheriff's Department said she wasn't certain on it. She would get back with me. I'm sure she's going to pose that question to the sheriff and then get back with me. She has not done so yet.
Let me follow up a little bit with that, because I also asked my sheriff, I said, you know, you're pretty good about handing out these Mother May I slips to people who can pass a background check, are of good moral character, can pay the money, can qualify, pay to go to the class, bother to do the paperwork, get the live scan, and come in here 2 or 3 times. You're pretty good about giving those out. But what about when you're not sheriff? What if the next guy hates guns and never gives one of those out and revokes every single one of them that comes up for renewal? And he kind of sat there on the other side of the desk and he goes, well, what can I do about that? And I said, support the open carry of an exposed weapon as God gave us the right to have. And there was just a little silence that followed that. So you might get that permit now, as Patrick says, but look, what if you can't get 20 rounds in the 9 ring? Now you don't have a permit. Now you don't have a right, because no government actor and no government agency should be in charge of your God-given inalienable right. And that's what we're fighting here.
Yeah, you know, most states, there's no guns listed like California.
No.
You can carry any handgun you want. And you have a card and you carry whatever you want, or just open carry. 31 states, I believe, right now, you can open carry now, and there hasn't been great incidents of issues. And so for people, and I particularly see this from law enforcement, because they seem to be the most nervous about this concept of open carry. But the reality is we've already proven it proved it in the United States for a long time. It works, it's successful, and it certainly reduces crime. If you went into Safeway and saw 4 people with an exposed handgun, it would look like everybody in that store is carrying, but yet there was only 4, but I guarantee you criminal acts in that store would go down. And it's what our town needs. I think it's what every town needs, but it would help Reading. And the people that were uncomfortable with it, they'd either get comfortable or they would leave. Just like us leaving because of liberal laws that are taking our freedoms away, we leave. Well, maybe it's time others that don't like open carry leave.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark, this question is for you. I was reviewing your case for open carry, and I see you have 4 requirements of proof. Does that also apply to non-U.S. citizens?
Open carry applies to legal residents who may not be citizens, but it does not apply to illegal aliens. So traditionally and historically, if you are a lawful citizen or a legal resident of long term, then constitutional rights per se, and we don't have constitutional rights, we have guarantees of the rights that God gave us. But those guarantees have extended historically to either citizens or people who are lawfully and legitimately here as non-citizens but have some type of extended permission to stay here, like a permanent resident card, a green card, something like that. So yes, but it does not apply to people who are here illegally, because Title 8, Section 1324, the illegal alien statutes say that's a crime, it's a felony. So if you're a felon, you can't very well pack a gun around.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Terry, real quick, before I had forgot to mention about the new California driver's licenses. If you're not familiar with them, California now is issuing 2 driver's licenses, a real one and then a phony one. But they will not tell you, if you just simply renew by mail, you'll get a license that says federal limits apply. And with that license, you cannot drive out of state, you cannot go into a federal building, you cannot fly with it, you cannot buy ammunition, guns, or alcohol with it. And they won't tell you about it. Even if you go down to DMV, they will not tell you. So you have to ask for this new term called Real ID. And you have to prove who you are with a certified birth certificate, your social security card unlaminated, and one other document like a utility bill in your name. And a passport would work in lieu of your birth certificate. A valid passport would work. And your current driver's license, if it's valid, is still valid for those purposes, but as of right now, you will not be able to board an aircraft if you don't have a valid passport with your current driver's license, if it's one of the older ones. So we have that going on. California Department of Justice recognizes the new California driver's license that says federal limits apply, but ATF does not. So federal law, you cannot buy a gun with it. Under state law, you can. So in essence, as dealers, we're all federally licensed, so you can't buy a gun with a federal limits apply driver's license. So that's happening right now, so just be aware of it. If your driver's license is about to expire, or if it even expires next year, you probably want to take documentation down to DMV, make an appointment if you want, and ask for real ID before it becomes a problem.
What I was wondering is if you're relying on whether we have the right to open carry or concealed carry on court interpretation or your interpretation of the Second Amendment, because it says you have the right to keep and bear arms, and that's spelled B-E-A-R, not B, or it's B-E-A-R, not B-A-R-E, as in bear.
Yeah, bear, B-E-A-R. means to hold, have, carry, and according to the Supreme Court of the United States, the definition means to carry on your person, within your clothing, or in your pocket any instrument capable of defensive action in the event of conflict, and you're allowed to perpetrate offensive or defensive action with this weapon in the event that you're confronted with conflict. That's what bear, B-E-A-R, means to the United States Supreme Court.
So as far as this lawsuit goes, is this a stepping stone to get where we could be concealed carry on?
No.
farther? No.
Concealed carry, according to San Diego v. Peruta, there have been 10 cases, I could name them, but it takes too long. Concealed carry is a right, or excuse me, concealed carry is not a right, and it falls wholly outside of the Second Amendment, and states may regulate it, ban it, permit it, as they so choose, under whatever circumstance they so choose it to be. So concealed carry isn't a right, it never was a right, and it will not be a right in the future. There was one right guaranteed us. This is the core right protected by the Second Amendment, which predates the Constitution, is wholly unconnected to malicious service, applies to individuals, and it applies to them outside their home in public areas, and that is open carry of an operable and loaded weapon. That is your right and no other.
But whose interpretation of the Second Amendment gave that? The Supreme Court?
Heller versus D.C., Cruikshank versus United States, Zatano versus Massachusetts, McDonald's versus the City of Chicago, Young versus Hawaii.
And those are recent?
For those of you that are familiar with the Heller decision, this was a huge decision for us, and it passed barely on a 5-4, so it was a very risky thing to run before the Supreme Court, but we got a victory in that, and that is going to be opening up the doors if we pursue things like Young and McDonald. And so it's really, that Heller decision was probably one of the biggest things that we've seen in our lifetime, and it's opening the door for all these other things. So if you Google Heller decision, you read about that a little bit, you'll see that that was very significant. And this Young case, we believe, will be very significant in finally putting to rest the issue of open carry. We believe ultimately this will go to the United States Supreme Court, and it will be the law of the land.
Also, there's another case, Nichols versus Brown, that follows that up, and it's already been argued. It's just waiting for the Ninth Circuit to rule. And Nichols versus Brown says, hey, I have the right to open carry. I want California to acknowledge that. That case is waiting right now. So we're sitting in a line of very important cases, and all we have to do is just push a little bit, and they're all going to tip over like a bunch of dominoes, as Patrick said, and the Supreme Court will literally, if the gun grabbers are dumb enough to take this to the Supreme Court, they're most certainly going to lose. So we have this here. We can do it. It's not a very big stretch for us to do it.
And you know, George Young, he was just an average guy. He was a Vietnam vet. He didn't like what was happening, and so he did this. He made this happen. One guy, he didn't have an attorney. One guy made it happen, no different than what Mark's trying to do right now.
With the new ammunition laws, with the Second Amendment, do we have a right constitutionally to the ammunition? Because without the ammunition, bearing arms doesn't do good.
Thomas Jefferson said, what good's a gun without a bullet? So, I mean, unfortunately, that's a fight for another day, but yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think that that's easily assailable. And by the way, the big gun organizations are starting to pull their heads out of the sand on this because they're already attacking the ammunition regulations. One of the big gun organizations has already got a case moving about the, quote, assault weapons ban. We just won a case, Duncan v. Becerra, that allows you to keep your 30-round magazines if you already possess them. You're not allowed to import them in California, but if somehow magically you find a bag of PMags laying in the garden, you're allowed to keep them. So the worm is turning, and also the big gun organizations have filed 3 amicus briefs against the rehearing of Young. Now, mind you, all 3 of these gun organizations were absolutely dead set that concealed carry is your right, and they lost every single time. So they're starting to get it, and they're now writing amicus briefs against the rehearing of Young versus Hawaii. So even the big gun organizations are on board with this. They recognize finally, that open carry is the protected right. We may like that, we may not, but it is the fact. We're going to get used to open carry, we're going to train ourselves, we're going to behave ourselves, we're going to be responsible, law-abiding citizens that have the God-given right to carry a weapon exposed. And ammunition, the ammunition ban, unfortunately, you can't chop it all down in one day. You got to take it one case at a time.
Now, with regards to the ammunition, it's what the state would argue, it's not a ban. They're not limiting what you can buy. You can still go buy whatever that you want. you're going to have to pass a background check. You're going to they extract $50 out of you to get a certificate. And each time after July 1st, 2019, when you purchase ammo, they're going to treat ammo in the exact same manner as buying a firearm. You will be charged a background check each and every time you buy ammo. But you're still going to be allowed to buy ammo, so therefore it is not a ban. It is regulation. And this is exactly what Gavin Newsom is all about. And this will be the death to California gun owners, this type of regulation. So think about it. Every time you buy a box of ammunition in the state of California, anywhere, you will be charged for a background check. They said exactly the same as buying a gun, which is $25. So how much ammo you want to buy? You want to buy 2 boxes of 22 shells when you're paying a $25 background check? It's going to change your habits. They're not banning anything, though, so they can hang their hat on that and say, we're not banning anything here. You can still get your ammo. We just want to make sure that felons don't get ammo. But that's what this state's going to be doing.
But we're also building a case against that because Murdoch v. Pennsylvania Supreme Court case says that no state can reduce a right to a privilege, nor can you charge a fee for the exercise of an enumerated protected constitutional right. So we also, you know, I mean, these things are all building, but like I said, you can't chop down all the trees in one day. I wish you could.
This gentleman wanted me to ask you, how does all this affect reloaders?
Well, not yet. So there are no components in this bill. That's what we understand. So brass, powder, primer is not affected in this. But you can imagine if this system gets fully functional and they get the massive cross-data referencing. This is they call it a massive, it's in the law, a massive cross-referencing check. They're going to do all these different checks, your address, your name, all these things are going to be checked over and over. And once they get that established, then they can easily add new laws to that would incorporate powder and primer. And we've seen that with like the roster for handguns. You start with a basic test and then you add this and then you add this, and it's been amended 3 times. They will certainly amend and change the ammunition registration to add more things, more components. And also it eliminates your legal ability, your lawful ability to buy ammunition out of California and bring it in. That if you're caught, it's a felony, and they'll do some stings, and you'll lose all your gun rights. And if you bought ammunition out of state, you would have to have it shipped to a dealer and registered at the dealer, which of course people are not going to do that. It's designed to change your shooting habits and to make your life miserable, which it'll do.
Can you buy components still out of state?
Yes, in-state or out of state, no registration on components as of now.
Today.
Today.
Okay, we have just a couple more questions, and then Mark and Patrick will be around here a little bit while we clean up. You'll be able to chit-chat with them. So, quickly.
Yeah, it was actually in regards to what you had just mentioned there on the out-of-state ammunition coming in and out. I was actually reading yesterday and wanted some clarification. I know in the past it had been 30 rounds, and now it's looking like it's going down to 0 rounds that are allowed to go in and out of the state. And so I wanted to see that, and I also wanted to see how that will affect concealed carry or open carry holders that will go interstate travel.
It's a good question. There is an exemption for hunters, and there is a small amount. I don't know the exact amount. I'd have to read it again, but it seemed like it was 20 rounds, something like that, for hunters or for someone that had a concealed weapon permit. So there is a number there, but it's small. It's not a large number. So clearly, if you went into Shields or Cabela's and you bought, you know, a couple hundred rounds or a case of ammunition, that would be subject to registration. The stings that they'll do is exactly that. They will sit out in front of the larger stores in the key border areas, Medford, Reno, Vegas. You know, half the cars in Cabela's parking lot right now are already California plated cars. Agent can simply sit in his vehicle out in the parking lot. He sees you come out. He sees you carrying a big case of ammunition and put it into a car that has California plate. He'll put that number, he'll call it forward to the check station, and they'll alert the attendant there to pull that vehicle over, citing a certain penal code. And if you're caught with that ammunition in that vehicle, you'll be arrested in a felony, and you'll have your day in court. And that's how they've done stings in the past, and that's how they'll do stings like this. Now, if it's a Nevada-plated car, and Nevada's just buying ammo, there's no probable cause that the crime's being committed. And simply buying ammunition in another state is not a crime. Passing it over the state line is a crime. So they have to catch you in that act Now, because of all that, they most likely will ask for identification in the border areas to see if you're a California resident. They probably will not allow you to buy ammo, most likely.
I'm feeling a little dense here. If it's
Is that a new thing or just just kidding?
It's coming on quickly. Constitutionally, we have the right to bear arms, but you know, and we supposedly be able to open carry. The Supreme Court says we're able to open carry. So if the Supreme Court is saying we're able to actually bear arms and open carry, how is it that, you know, our law enforcement are able to actually, you know, turn that around to where we become criminals if we're caught carrying, period?
Well, that's an easy one, because you cannot force a state to stop enforcing an unconstitutional law unless you sue them. And when you talk to your sheriff, that's a good question. You should ask him that, because he's a constitutional officer and he has the Article 20 under the California Constitution. He's taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. And Article 3 of the California Constitution, Section 1 says, California is an inseparable part of the United States and the Constitution is the highest law of the land. So that's a real good question for your sheriff, and here's what he's going to tell you. Well, I have to obey the California Constitution, and the California Peace Officers Association tells me that the court rules don't apply to me. That's what he's going to tell you, because I've heard that myself several times. So that's why we must go into a federal court which will tell the state of California, you have to follow your own rules. And you know, there are other ways to do this. If 100,000 of us went to Sacramento armed, I'm sure we would win something. But we can't get 3,000 people to come to a room on any given day, so that's probably never going to happen. The way to do this legally, morally, and ethically is sue them. That's what we propose to do, and we can win that. So I don't like it, but that's the way it is.
So is that the main reason, is it hasn't come to a case to where somebody's
No one has sued the state of California and said you must follow the rules that the court tells you to follow, because they ignore the rules all the time. I mean, they do it constantly on a daily basis, and your rights mean nothing to them. So absolutely, literally nothing.
So how do we fight that fight now instead of all the rest of them?
The way to fight it is sue them and win. And if we can win in open carry, it will tell people that we can win in other areas. And all we need is help. We need people in public to stand up and say they will not go quietly into the night. They will not abdicate their liberty to the government or anybody else for that matter. So let's win one. And then let's teach other people how to win and keep winning. That's how we do it. Because I don't think there are 1 million people in California that are prepared to fight, and that's the only other way to win.
And I know you, and you're my friend, and you're not dense.
The state of California was sued years ago over that law where if you brought a California non-smog car in the state, you're fined $300. And I was talking to some people waiting for their check, plus the interest on it after they had settled, because there's I believe in the Bill of Rights, no state is supposed to pass a law or pass a tax where it impedes interstate commerce.
Yep.
Now, will we have to sue the state on the ammunition impeding in order to get that repealed?
Well, I think the Interstate Commerce Clause is a real great avenue to that, but I'm not in on that case, so I can't say for sure. I mean, personally, that would be something I'd look at if I was in on that case, but I'm not. And what I want to do is, first I want to secure the gun. I've been hoarding ammo for years, so I'm good for a while. But
one case at a time.
One case at a time, yeah.
All right, guys. So with that, check out what's left over there on the gear. The militia's back here, can answer your questions.
Thank you, everybody.
Other things back here.
Appreciate you.
And please donate. Thank you so much.